of any people may be represented by all of them, a majority of them, a minority of them, or one of them. And if Fidel Castro is the only human being that represents humanity at its best, humanity will never be diminished one iota. Fidel Castro is a man of great stature and great comprehension, a little island like Cuba. He is himself reached beyond this island of Cuba. He is known everywhere throughout the world, and he is respected everywhere throughout the world, except by capitalist pigs everywhere. America has no right to talk to Cuba. Cuba can teach America so many things. America says that it's one of the richest countries in the world. It even demeans Cuba because it's one of the poorest. Yet the conditions of health of a child in Cuba is better than the conditions of health of any child in America. From the child that child is born until it dies, it will have a doctor in its community that will monitor every movement it makes, free of charge. Because Fidel Castro understands that the most important thing in a society is the quantity and quality of the people and their rising level of consciousness that they have, first of all, a responsibility to other Cubans before they have a responsibility to themselves. America is the exact opposite. Doctors to Africa than America and all of Western Europe together have sent. We're not even talking about freedom fighters. When I first went to Africa in the 1960s, I was shocked. Among all the liberation movements, PAIGC, Guinea-Bissau, Frelimo, MPLA, among all of them, I found Cuban combatants there teaching them, even sometimes fighting and dying with them. Fidel Castro, we have to respect him. We are Pan-Africanists, and Fidel Castro is a Pan-Africanist of the highest order. When Angola was bleeding and the racist pigs in South Africa invaded Angola, Fidel Castro sent the sons and daughters of Africa, sent those Cubans there whose bloodstream has Africa tied to it, to go and defend Africa, to go and defend Africa's dignity. Fidel Castro, that's why the African community, we instinctively love him. When Fidel Castro came to America at the United Nations, he came to live at the Theresa Hotel in Harlem. No other president has ever done that. That's the honor he paid to us. And he paid us that honor because we instinctively supported him. We always instinctively support justice. And we know that Fidel Castro is undergoing a just struggle, a struggle for independence, a struggle to be not under the hegemony of American imperialism like all the other puppets in the Caribbean. When America says jump, they say how high. Fidel Castro is concerned with one thing, making sure that the national resources of this country serve the priority of the well-being of his people. Go to these other countries. They sell whatever they have. As a matter of fact, their leaders are sorry, slavery is over. Tourism is properly controlled by the Cuban Communist Party. Properly controlled. And they're making experiments with it, but they themselves are in the position of controlling. And has within a limited aspect because of this one, it's only experiments. Of course, U.S. capitalism is hoping that through this will happen, but it's just a fight always. You go into a ring, you fight, you're convinced you will win, the enemy is convinced they will win. We will see. But I think the attack, the political attack is what I want to speak of. Under this political attack, it appears that because the people in Cuba are poor and they have nothing to eat, that they'll be disgruntled. Vietnam defeated America. Defeated America. And I was in North Vietnam. I had one of the greatest honors of my life. I had lunch with Ho Chi Minh in North Vietnam when American planes were bombing North Vietnam. One of the greatest honors of my life. And the Vietnamese who fought America, they fought America, and every Vietnamese soldier had not one bowl of rice a day. That was their ration. And they whooped America. What does not having food have to do with a fight when you're down? Matter of fact, the poorer you are, the more determined you are in the struggle. So if America keeps thinking that because now the Cubans will only have one bowl of rice, the Vietnamese defeated them on one bowl of rice. Best traditions of any people may be represented by all of them, a majority of them, a minority of them, or one of them.
Revolutionary greetings. Victor Coronado over here alongside Carlos Cruz Mosquera. We are Anticonquista. Please check us out at anticonquista.com. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. So please like, please subscribe, please share. Carlos, how we doing, brother?
Yeah, all good, all good.
All right.
A little bit, as you know, a little bit under the weather after my second vaccine. But yeah, it's important to come on and and talk about the latest stuff with Cuba.
Absolutely. I had my first shot, excuse me, on Tuesday, and I'm scheduled for my second one on August 3rd. So you said you got the Pfizer, right?
Pfizer, yeah.
Yeah. So me too. Yeah. All right. So let's get right into it. We're going to start off and lead with Cuba. That's obviously the lead. And we will touch on a few other things in Latin America, but obviously the biggest news story has been since Sunday, Cuba. So let's sort of recap. And again, we're going to synthesize here and try to, give a little recap of what's happened. So on July 11th, that was last Sunday, quote unquote, organic protests break out in Cuba. Social media, American politicians and Western media outlets go all in on a media blitz to attack the sovereign state of Cuba. President Miguel Diaz-Canel responds, accusing the United States of being behind this media, what he called a media terrorism campaign. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez provides a very detailed presentation on who was behind the attack, how it was financed, and when it began. It's a 2-hour presentation. You can find it on YouTube and Cuba Debate. The revolution begins to defend its sovereignty, taking to the streets in counter demonstrations. Miguel Diaz-Canel, the president of Cuba, was very defiant in calling on all communists and revolutionaries to defend the revolution. Some took that as a way of some interpreted that as him calling for civil war, and he clarified that that's not what he was calling for. It's just that in Cuba, you don't see protests like that, and there were violent protests, and it was a way to clearly to disrupt civil society and to destabilize the Cuban system. And so, just an important note: Reuters ran a headline titled "Fake News Muddies Online Waters During Cuba Protests." I'll try to pull it up, but I'll wait for your response. But in that piece, they alluded to, they didn't do a really good job, but even they had to admit that there's so much fake news that's out there. The Guardian, I believe the New York Times, they all use these images showing, the quote unquote organic protest, which what they were actually showing were images of people who were supporting the Cuban Revolution. In fact, one of the Cuban Five was in one of these images, which is ludicrous, and it's absurd when you think about it, that they used an image. And in the front, en el frente, ahí estaba uno de los cinco, one of the Cuban Five. I mean, that's how crazy.
I think one of the pictures had 26th of July flag as well.
Yeah. So I'll wait for your response, and then we can get into it. There's a lot that we're going to cover on Cuba. So your thoughts?
No, yeah, just as the government's saying, this is social media terrorism. Really, what they're doing. There's so much lies. Us as a diaspora, there's so many videos going around supposedly of the killings of protesters and arrests and so on. I'll give you one example. There's a video that's gone viral of the Cuban police going to arrest a man, his wife shouting in the background. I think she was filming, and then right in the middle of the video, as they're taking him, it splits, and the next scene is a pool of blood in the house, and the woman screaming, "They've shot him! They shot him! They killed him!" But they don't show exactly what happens, and that's problematic. And now it's been confirmed that of course it didn't happen. The guy didn't get shot. He did get arrested. So there's the kind of false information that, and these are the type of protesters, supposed protesters that the Cuban government is dealing with. Not fair. They're not interested. Some of them, of course, as we've been saying all along in our coverage of it, there are of course people in Cuba who have legitimate concerns. The Cuban government themselves, the president himself, has admitted that there are shortcomings from the government, but yeah, just the way this is being reported is, incredibly there's such distortion, and of course the empire, US and Europe, they benefit from this, because we know that Cuba represents a bastion of hope for Latin American people, for socialism, and of course the US of course is always going to have geopolitical and as well as economic interests on the island. So the sooner they can get rid of the socialist government, the better, and anything goes with them, whether it's the blockade or whether it's this social media war. And it's really sad, really. I know we're going to get into it, but it's really sad to see progressives or so-called progressives and the left, part of the left, falling for this this position in which they basically take the imperialist side and and accuse the Cuban government, the people's government. Let's call it that, the people's government in Cuba, because the government in Cuba is the people of Cuba. It's not, they try and separate it in the way they cover it. They try and separate the Cuban government from its people, but if we really analyze the political system in Cuba, we would see that the government is actually made up of regular Cubans who are elected to represent their constituencies, and it's it's way more democratic. I think maybe we can have a different show on this, but showing the ins and outs of the political system in Cuba and how much more democratic it is than the West. And just to give one example, and we've posted on this several times in ANTICONQUISTA, talking about dictatorship and democracies, everybody has this idea that because Cuba's a one-party state, that it's a dictatorship, and people don't get involved in politics, which is completely false. The people of Cuba are involved in politics more than they are here in the West, in the UK where I am, or in the US and elsewhere, where there's this facade of democracy, where we are forced to choose between the lesser of two evils, and in Cuba is not like that. And also to point out, like, statistics, you can Google this and use like the different sources that are out there, reliable sources that are out there. The US has around 60% voter turnout during presidential elections. Cuba consistently has 86 plus, often in the 90s, of voter turnout. And of course, with no reliable sources, people will say, but they're forced to vote, and that takes away from the agency of the Cuban people, who are actually involved in the political process more, because they're educated, politically educated way more than we are in the West. So yeah, all of this is just again like an attack, an imperialist attack against Cuba. And it's not to say that we don't recognize the issues that do occur in Cuba, but it's important to recognize that the majority, the principal reason for these issues that Cuban society live is, of course, the US blockade, which cost the Cuban economy billions. From some estimates are 5 to 10 billion a year. So of course, that's going to make a huge difference in people's livelihoods and so on.
So newsflash, Cubans govern Cuba. so what you were saying before, Cuba's people say, oh, there's no freedom, and there's no democracy, and there's no this, and I mean, it's Cuba has a different system. It's a different political and economic system, and we need to stop applying our Western standards of what a society should look like and say, well, the Cubans need to do the same as us. The Cubans they have self-determination. They had a civil war. One side lost, another won. And since then, they've been experimenting with socialism. And in Cuba, you don't need to be a member of the Communist Party. There is only one single party in Cuba. In the 70s, and I was trying to look for the exact date, you know, Fidel, in speaking to intellectuals, said, within the revolution, everything. Outside the revolution, nothing. And what he said was, what he meant by that was, look, if you're a humanist, then you should be for the revolution. Why? Because we're going to educate people. We're going to make sure that everyone is taken care of. We're going to make sure that you're going to get access to great health care. We're going to make sure that we live in a safe, you know, in terms of public safety, in a safe, very safe society. And we're trying to build a new man, right? We're trying to recreate and totally transform society into a different way of thinking. And so he said, look, within the revolution, everything, outside the revolution, nothing. And they studied, I say the Cuban revolutionaries studied revolution all over Latin America. And they came to one conclusion, that is that if you allow any counter-revolutionary activity, you're just giving way for the imperialists to invade. It's happened everywhere. And so they were very firm in defending their sovereignty and defending their nation. And so I think it's important to point that out. When you run for office in Cuba, you don't have to be a member of the Communist Party. And many people are elected who are not members of the Communist Party. And it's money.
Also, let me there's no money involved in the election even.
Right.
So people stand out of actual proposals that are going to make a difference in people's lives, not influenced by corporate sponsors who are going to demand that you obviously side with the capitalists and the rich and the powerful. So we have to maybe we could do like a whole segment on this in another episode, but we have to understand the political system in Cuba is not as simplistic as they paint it out to be, and it's way more democratic than what we have in the West.
It's important to know what Cuba was like before 1959. It was considered by many the whorehouse of the Caribbean. This is where American gringo politicians would go and gamble and drink and get involved with prostitution, where American gangsters, and I have the video. If we have time, I'll play it. I shared it privately amongst the compañeros at ANTICONQUISTA. Meyer Lansky, right? American gangster, right? An American gangster owned several hotels in Cuba, and he was just one of many of the American gangsters that had a piece of the pie there in Havana, and essentially was raping, the Cuban people, right? And I have a video. There's a video. You can look it up on YouTube. You can look up just YouTube Meyer Lansky in Cuba, and you're going to find the video, an interview of Meyer Lansky's daughter asking for retribution because she feels like she's owed something. This is the mentality of many Americans and many Cuban Americans who owned a lot of land and basically looked at Black Cubans as second-class citizens. And
we'll get into this, Victor, but
go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's fucked up that it's these same wealthy, white, rich Cuban Americans who are now using and also influencing liberal identity politics groups, Black groups, Latin American groups to suggest that in Cuba there's the government kills Black people. So it's these same white Cubans who are using the trendy BLM, the trendy identity politics stuff to suggest that in Cuba there's this like genocide of Black people. Again, as Victor is showing the post that we this is a post where we counter what the people at the Afro Latin diaspora posted, and we had to counter it because of the sources used. It's incredible, it's talking about and again, like we don't we're not saying that there's no racism in Cuba, we're not saying that there's no racial inequality, you know, if you read the post, you'll see that, you know, it's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that what groups like the Afro-Latin diaspora are doing is disingenuine, is dishonest, using dishonest sources, using conclusions that are dishonest in what they're portraying to their followers and stuff. So
and it's
so
very
yeah, and one of the sources, and the original point was, one of the sources that was used in this particular infograph by the Afro-Latino diaspora is a white American, a Cuban American, who suggested that I can't remember the exact thing that they were saying, but they used them as a source, a right-wing white business owner, Cuban American, and they're using him as a source to say that black people were, like, you know, super oppressed and systematically oppressed is the word they use.
Yeah, and so, you know, this is, you know, first of all, that's very opportunistic. The timing of it's very opportunistic. The other thing is that you're seeing a lot of this stuff on the so-called left and progressives and, you know, so-called revolutionary. You know, this new, what I think Miguel Diaz, Canet, I'm not sure if it was him or another one of the high-ranking officials over there, called, you know, this third way, new quote unquote nuanced position on Cuba. You know, which, you know, it's just a euphemism for, I'm going to take some talking points from the State Department and just regurgitate it to the people, right? If you go on to you know, the Instagram of things like young Americans against socialism, you know, I can't tell the difference between people like that and some of the stuff that the so-called left and progressives, so-called progressive folks are spewing about Cuba. And we have to look, so all of that aside, can we look at the record? I would encourage folks to look at the first declaration, the second declaration of Havana. I would encourage folks to study the Cuban Revolution. I would encourage folks to look at the history of Cuba's internationalism in Africa. In 1963, in Algeria, at the request of Algerian President Ahmed Ben Bella, Castro sends a battalion of 22 tanks and several hundred soldiers under the command of Efigenio Amijeras to Algeria to help the Algerian armed forces repel an attack by Morocco in the Tindouf region. This is Cuba's first international military operation in Africa. In 1965, Che Guevara gets sent to go to the Congo. In 1966, they have a tricontinental in Havana attended by liberation movements from all over the world, approximately 70 Asian, African, and Latin American countries. We can go to then 1975, Operation Carlota begins. Cuba establishes an airlift and sends thousands of soldiers, volunteer soldiers, to Angola. This volunteer force halts this advance of South African and Zairean troops moving into Luanda to prevent Angola's independence. In 1978, troops get sent to Ethiopia, so on and so forth. I mean, we could, you know, you should know about the history of the role that Fidel Castro from Cuba commanding troops in Angola against the South African apartheid regime at the same time when the United States Empire had the ANC and Nelson Mandela listed as a terrorist. All right. So
Victor, let me just add to that as well, that I'm seeing online nowadays as well that a revision of that history too, because they're saying that those soldiers were forced to go and fight in Africa, and they were forced, and it wasn't out of their own will. Like, not knowing the history of Cuba, the history of a sense of solidarity after what they went through after the Victorious Revolution, the Cuban people themselves volunteered because they saw this, just as the Cuban doctors volunteer to go and help out elsewhere in the world. Cuban soldiers volunteer because there's a sense of solidarity with the rest of the world. It has nothing to do, because there's a projection. There's the projection of what the US does with their troops, and the capitalist nations do with their troops, forcing them to do their work, their imperialist work around the world. But it's not what Cuba did. And the people themselves. With the coronavirus, you saw like Cuban doctors and nurses flying all over the world to try and help out of solidarity. That's the main interest.
The Black Panther Party and the BLA seeking refuge, members of the BLA seeking again, Asada Shakur, remember that. She's still in Cuba. That's Tupac's aunt. She's still in Cuba to this day, and they've never used her as a political bargaining chick. And they could have, right? They could have. If you're going to be real cynical, real Machiavellian about all this stuff, you could say, you know what? All right, you guys want Asada? Let's talk. That's always been a starting point for the United States government. And Cuba's response is, stop it already. We're not doing that shit. We're not fucking doing that shit. All right. There's that. There's, Kwame Ture spoke about, if my memory calls me correct, I believe nobody would give, nobody would rent to the Cuban revolutionaries in downtown Manhattan, when they went to go to the UN. So Fidel threatened to go and say, all right, fuck it. We're just going to camp out in front of the UN headquarters. And then they get a phone call saying, nah, come to Harlem, right? And there's the whole meeting of Fidel and Malcolm and stuff like that. And Fidel goes there not once but twice and is received by the Harlemites and is like, yo, we black and brown power, baby, basically. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know how anyone can study all this stuff. And if you haven't studied, it's okay. Like, if you don't know this history, then it's okay. You can't take a position on it, however. But if you have studied this stuff and you're still taking a position, and again, to be clear, let's be clear about what we're saying. In Cuba has racism exists in Cuba because people are racist, right? You're not going to do 500 years of white supremacy. You're not going to undo 500 years of white supremacy and that mentality. You go to the Dominican Republic right now, I hear black Dominicans saying, well, I hate those Haitians because they're black. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, but you're black. Like, this is the colonized mentality, right? Racism exists. But to say it's systemic and endorsed by the state or sponsored by the state, you're being disingenuous and you're lying to people. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And we do want to emphasize, and this is an issue. This is a topic. Racism in Cuba is a topic that actually we're organizing at the moment as Anticonquista. We're organizing an in-depth conversation between us and some African comrades who will be talking about this in more detail. But the thing is, it's not the time at the moment when Cuba's being attacked, when there's a war against Cuba, a social media war, a propaganda war against Cuba, for us to for the diaspora to be bringing up bringing up racial inequality, not just bringing it up because there's no problem bringing it up at this moment and using that to then say the Cuban government is this, the Cuban government is that, and also people like the what they call the Afro Latino diaspora page, even claiming that the Cuban government kills black people and black protesters, which they have no proof of. But yeah, it's.
The Cuban government has confirmed that one person is dead because of the protest. That's what we know. I haven't seen any other, Western media outlets or, leftist outlets, or even, well, of course, we can get into a little bit about what by the way, I've infiltrated 2 Facebook groups, Gusano groups, and the shit on there is wild. But they're claiming all types of stuff, which none of it is no one's verified this stuff. No one's fact checked this stuff. They're just, we can get a little bit into that. But right now that we know of, the Cuban government has confirmed that one person has died due to the protest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but no, what I'm saying is that, like the page, the Afro Latino diaspora page, are saying that black protesters and black people are killed by the Cuban government without providing sources, without providing information. Like, where did you get this from? And at this particular moment, it's such it's opportunistic. It's so frustrating, yeah.
To push a certain agenda. No, absolutely. So I know something else you wanted to talk about, Carlos, was the because again, it's news, and she's allegedly, purportedly a socialist, AOC, and her tweets on Cuba. I went ahead and pulled them up right there. Let's see here. So, if you, this is the statement right here. Today, Representative, AOC released the following statement on demonstrations in Cuba. We are seeing Cubans rise up and protest for their rights like never before. We stand in solidarity with them, and we condemn the anti-democratic actions led by President Diaz-Canel. The suppression of the media, speech, and protests are all gross violations of civil rights. I'm going to stop there because what she says next is what she should have said, but I don't know if folks know. And someone sent me the original tweet, and I went to it, and it was deleted. So her original tweet was that statement right there. And apparently people put so much pressure on her that then she said the following. She deleted that tweet and then said the following, or added the following. We also must name the U.S. contribution to Cuban suffering, our 60-year-old embargo. Last month, once again, the UN voted overwhelmingly to call on the United States to lift its embargo on Cuba. This embargo is absurdly cruel. And like too many other U.S. policies targeting Latin Americans, the cruelty is the point. I outright reject the Biden administration's defense of the embargo. It is never acceptable for us to use cruelty as a point of leverage against everyday people, end quote, or end statement there. So your response?
Yeah, no, I just think, and we said, I said recently that the left does have this this obsession with AOC, that I don't think is fair, because it's all of them. I don't know why they have it for AOC, but yeah, AOC, as for us as the Latin American diaspora, we do have to, I guess, when she does things like this, we have to counter it, because what she's doing here is what Victor Jara, the great Chilean revolutionary, said, had a phrase, a song for it called "Ni chicha ni limonada." You're neither this or that, and this is what she's doing in this statement. By saying that, beginning by saying that, anti-democratic actions and suppression of media and speech and protests, etc., and then talking about the embargo, the blockade, is ni chicha ni limonada. like choose a side.
Right.
It's ni chicha ni limonada. I don't know why that just happened. So yeah, like choose a side. Like, are you actually a socialist? But we know, like, her socialism is really what we would call social imperialism and social democracy, which isn't really socialism. It isn't Cuban socialism. It isn't revolutionary socialism. It's a socialism that thinks that we can coexist with capitalism. It's a socialism that has no problem with capitalism and is more than glad to exist with it and embrace it. And so yeah, I don't see why we give AOC so much attention. I don't think also that we should demonize her as she is demonized in the lefty circles. I think there's this obsession, and I feel uncomfortable when the white left have this obsession with AOC as this kind of I'm not saying, of course she is that, but like she's kind of used as this pin up politician for things that really is all of the US government and not just AOC. In fact, AOC is probably says less problematic shit than the rest of them. But yeah, again, like I was saying, obviously she's a Latina, and our people, of course, we need to counter what she says, because a lot of our people, unfortunately, because she has the talking points, she seems like she's progressive, and she talks about socialism, again, not revolutionary socialism, but reformist socialism. So it's important for us to to break down what she says and show that really, like, if you were really to stand with the Cuban people, you would stand with the Cuban government, because as we were saying earlier, the Cuban government is the Cuban people. Yeah.
An attack on Cuba is an attack on really the entire movement in the hemisphere. This entire movement is not, this movement towards socialism, and I'm going to keep saying it. There is, not here in the diaspora, but in Latin America and the Caribbean, there is a move towards the left. There's a move towards the left. That there's a revolution happening in Latin America. You're seeing it. Even when we take step backs, we keep coming back stronger. And I don't think that, think about this for a second. We're Latin Americans. What are we? We're a 500-year, new thing that was created. And so we don't, I go back to, I started rereading Malcolm X speeches, when he's there asking the public, who are you? What was your name before it was Smith and before it was Johnson? And he would captivate the audience, to Latin Americans. Who the fuck are we? We need to study our own history. And Carlos, you have said this before. We're not here to say that we know everything, that we're experts in anything. We study this stuff. We study the empire. We study our own history, and we're learning as we go along. And we try to provide what we hope is a thoughtful analysis, a revolutionary analysis of what's happening. This is a 500+ year struggle, and it's important for Cuba. Take Cuba as an example, and take the opposite of what happened in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, which is a colony. What Puerto Ricans need to do is to do what the Cubans did, which is kick out every single American institution and every single American, and only invite Americans back on Puerto Rican terms, on Puerto Rico's terms. And so, we're going to get into the headlines of some other stuff. Evo Morales saying that they're uncovering stuff of what happened with CIA plots in 2019. The United States empire is not our friend. They are our enemy. All right. They would destroy all of us if they could, because they want our natural resources. They want our quote unquote cheap labor. All right. So as long as they get to control us, then we can go ahead and do quote unquote business with them. And that's what this whole thing is about. So that's why I'm glad to see what I saw on social media. I was one who for years, was saying, what is social media? What the fuck is this? But I when you hear the president of Cuba saying we need to take to social media and fight back, there is something to be said about this medium. It's that powerful. So when I saw, when we went back on air on Sunday, and we saw the response, and then we went and we looked, all week. I've been looking all week online and stuff like that, and people are fighting back. And people are fighting. It's important that we fight back, because Cuba is being attacked through the cyber attack, through social media. So this work, I believe, is really important, and we appreciate that everyone, stay in that fight, and we have to continue fighing, all of us collectively.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I wanted to add, also, like thinking about AOC, and the irony of her saying, the undemocratic actions of the Cuban government. Going back to the funding in politics in the US and Cuba, in Cuba there's no private sponsors of politicians. AOC is tied to the Democratic Party. She needs to, as much as she may clash with Biden on certain things, she needs to toe the line. She can't go against the corporate capitalist sponsors of the Democratic Party. And that's why she takes positions like Cuba is undemocratic and suppresses media and, the usual imperialist talking points, because she's in bed, she's just like the rest of the politicians in the US and in the West. They're in bed with the capitalist elites. So yeah, it would be ridiculous for us to think of her as anything else than that. She's
her,
just basically
the squad, Bernie Sanders, all of them.
Yeah.
Should we go on then should we now segue into the rest of the headlines, or did you want anything else? Any final thoughts on Cuba?
Yeah, I wanted to mention one last thing. There's an academic, a Black Cuban academic called Dr. Odette Casamayor Cisneros, who's popping off on Twitter. She's become very popular just very recently. I was looking at her Twitter, and just a couple of weeks back, she was just like a regular academic, not really doing great numbers on Twitter. All of a sudden, she's got tens of thousands of likes, of shares, and so on because of her line on Cuba. So she's against the blockade, just like AOC. She's calling for an end to the blockade. But again, ni chicha ni limona. So she says she's against the blockade, but then she says that the Cuban government is undemocratic and the dictatorship, and using her race to further the point that the Cuban government oppresses black people systematically and so on. So I did a little, just a surface kind of investigation into who she is and what she does and who she works with. She has a regular column on a site called On Cuba News, which is owned by Fuego Enterprises, which is a Miami Cuban American based capitalist corporate company who has interest in Cuba. And again, so it just goes to show, these people are not independent thinkers. They're not progressive. They are in bed with corporate interests. They might, I'm not going to say that Dr. Casamayor Cisneros she may not consciously be doing this. I'm not saying that she's getting a cut or anything like that. But On Cuba News posts her column because she represents, she talks what they want people to hear, what the corporate Cuban American media want people to hear. And so these are the people that we're listening to. She's not a socialist. She's not a revolutionary. She might have good work in terms of racial studies, but again, like using this particular moment to attack the Cuban government and also to exaggerate and distort and lie, just like other people have been doing in terms of the situation with the racial situation in Cuba, is at this very moment is so opportunistic and dangerous. It's dangerous. And also and again, to emphasize that we're not saying that racial inequality doesn't exist in Cuba. As we said in our post, it does. And one of the things, like, for example, one of the ways that the Cuban government overlooked and continues to overlook in certain areas of policy is, for example, there's universal coverage of food, shelter, education for Cuban people. And it's universal, so everybody gets it, regardless of who your family are, regardless of your race, etc. That's a bit of a mistake, because it should be targeted. It should be, let's look at the families, the neighborhoods, the areas that are most oppressed. Particularly, let's look at Black people who are most oppressed in society, usually, and in Latin America historically, and target those communities to receive these, rather than like a blanket thing, like everybody receives the same, because some families are not going to need it. Some white Cuban families who stayed on the island and are with the revolution don't need it. They don't need some of this help. Or some white Cuban families who stayed and aren't with the revolution, who live there because that happens to, don't need food and free food and free education and so on. So or land and housing, because they already have land and housing. It does exist, and there's things that have been overlooked. But then to equate that to systematic oppression of Black people, which is what they're calling it, is disingenuous and dangerous, again, because of the current climate.
And by the way, these are conversations that are being had in Cuba right now, because it, clearly what you're speaking to is, basically this idea that 60 years of a revolution is going to undo 500 years of colonialism and real systematic oppression. You know, but again, they're having those conversations in Cuba, and
of course they're having the conversations, and Black Cubans are involved in creating policy and changing things, you know, by people saying that these things exist without talking about the things that are being done by Black Cubans and Cubans in general to change social inequality, racial inequality. Not to say that they've achieved everything that they wanted to achieve, but how are we going to ignore that there's people there who are educated, who are revolutionary, who are fighting, who are struggling, activists who aren't against the government, but who know that the government needs to change certain things. That exists. So for it to be like what we're seeing right now is a portrayal of Cuba as particularly on this topic, is that Black people exist outside of Cuban society and are being oppressed. When if you go to Cuba, if you speak to Cubans, Black Cuban academics, Black Cuban politicians, Black Cuban activists, regular citizens who participate in the political process are doing work to change the situation in Cuba for themselves. So it's paternalistic and ridiculous for us in the diaspora and for anybody outside of Cuba to portray Black Cubans as, you know, needing to be saved, when, you know, they can stand up for themselves, and they do, and they also form part of the government and institutions. So yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to say one last thing about Cuba, and then again, unless you have something else, we'll move on. I mentioned before how I infiltrated these Facebook groups. They're terrifying, and a couple things I just noticed. You know, they have no real, not that they have a chance against defeating the revolution, but they have no policy solutions. I don't see any policy solutions. I don't see any political platforms. I don't see any vision. I don't see any plan for governing. I don't see any plan for, if they were to be triumphant, to be how would you transition? What type of Cuban society would you want to create, right? What type of political economic model are you offering? What I am seeing is a promotion of violence, a promotion of terrorism as a political tactic. Seriously, I'm not playing. I mean, I got images of Molotov cocktails, of all types of stuff that they're promoting. Seriously, they're promoting terrorism, and from the outside, right? From the outside, directing traffic over there and saying, and basically provoking Cubans to hate each other, to use violence and terrorism as a political strategy or tactic, to try to help overthrow the government. And there's nothing. They're very disorganized. They're very desperate. And it is scary. I mean, I'm not worried about my only concern, you know, obviously would always be a U.S. intervention. Clearly, besides that, you know, I'm not worried about what's happening right now, because again, the Cuban Revolution is in pretty good hands. I mean, they've trained professional revolutionaries. You know,
and I think we could see these protesters maybe trying to create the conditions for a possible intervention, and trying to suss out whether it would be possible in the current climate with the situation, the pandemic, and so on. But they're always going to find that it's not, because the people protesting are really a minority, and we're seeing images today,
right,
and in the last few days, of hundreds of thousands of Cubans going out to the streets to defend the revolution, to defend the government. So yeah, you know, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah,
for US to intervene militarily, at least.
Right. I would encourage folks, try it out. You know, use refrain, because they're what they're doing is they're going through the lists, right? Eventually, I'm pretty sure they're going to figure me out and they're going to kick me out. I've already was kicked out of one of the groups, but I just kind of go in there and just peruse. I just go in there and just check out what they're. And again, there's zero vision. It's a desperate group of people who are calling for violence, calling for hatred, and calling for terrorism on the island. It's a pretty scary group of people. But anyways, so let's go ahead and segue into, unless you have something else, Carlos.
No.
Okay, so let's segue into some of the other news. We don't want to neglect the rest of Latin America. and the Caribbean. In Mexico, so let's turn over to Mexico. Mexico's foreign ministry told the OAS, or the Organization of American States, to stop interfering in Bolivia's internal affairs after Bolivia recently arrested coup plotter, former President Janine Áñez, along with 2 of her former ministers. The Organization of American States, I encourage folks to study the history of the Organization of American States. It was essentially created by the West, by the U.S., as an instrument and as an imperial tool to try to control the region. Carlos, your thoughts on Mexico telling the OAS to stop fucking with Bolivia?
Yeah, no, I think, again, like, it's problematic because we know that AMLO, Mexico's president, is a bit of a controversial figure in the left. For us, we, as we've said before in these shows, like, we don't want to be simplistic in our takes, and also, like, to recognize that just like how the Cuban people should have the freedom to deal with their affairs without outside interference, so do Mexican people have the same right and freedom. AMLO, is problematic. There are things that can and should be criticized in terms of some of these policies. Again, like, not going deep enough. Quite reformist rather than revolutionary, but has shown consistently with Venezuela, now with Bolivia, that particularly on the point of sovereignty, let the people be, let these countries be, let them, and it's applicable, just as AMLO and Mexico are saying, let Venezuela be, stop meddling in their affairs, stop instigating civil conflict and political conflict, and in Bolivia as well. We can say the same about Mexico. Let Mexico be. We hope. My personal opinion is that hopefully in the very near future, Mexican people can bring in an actual socialist or socialist leaning a government who will actually take more revolutionary, a more revolutionary stance in the country, and finally, after so many decades of the same shit, change the conditions for Mexican people. But yeah, this is a situation we see all over our region, and but yeah, the main point here is that it's important for AMLO and for the rest of Latin America to emphasize that our different nations have the right to organize themselves politically without outside interference. And of course, OAS does the US empire. Almagro, what's his first name? I forget. Almagro. He's such a despicable figure, and he's there, of course, for the money, and he's basically a puppet of the US. So yeah, hopefully we can get rid of the OAS at some point as well.
Absolutely. The second headline is very similar to the first. He took a similar position on Cuba. He called for the lifting of the U.S. blockade. If the U.S. is saying that essentially the U.S. really wants to help Cuba in any humanitarian way, that they would lift the blockade, condemn the U.S. for the blockade, and essentially had the same position as pretty much let Cuba be, leave Cuba the fuck alone. Lastly, from another report here on Mexico, Mexico's health ministry on Saturday reported, 12,631 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the country, and 225 more fatalities, bringing the total of infections to 2,654,699, with more than 250,000 dead, 240 deaths to be exact. Any response on that before we move forward?
Yeah, it's just a sad situation. A similar thing that we're seeing in places like Brazil and elsewhere in the region. And yeah, hopefully now with also like the Cubans with their vaccines and stuff, hopefully we're going to start seeing some regional solidarity in terms of dealing with the pandemic as well. So
yeah, they need help with manufacturing is what the biggest issue with that.
And maybe Mexico, Mexico has great technological and capability and stuff. So yeah, maybe there could be a collaboration there as well.
Absolutely. In Haiti, former President John Bertrand Aristide returned to Haiti while being welcomed by hundreds of supporters. I don't know if anyone caught some of the videos and images, but that was it was pretty cool to see. In Haiti, President Biden continues to insist, that they'll, will protect their embassy, but they won't send troops to Haiti. As you know,
they don't need to.
Yeah,
they don't need to because they have mercenaries there already.
Right. And so here's my, the next point on Haiti. I was very careful. I was thinking about this leading up to the program. So I'm going to say this here. There are a lot of accusations being made with zero evidence being presented as to who was behind the actual assassination of former Haitian President Jovenel Moïse, who was ruling by dictate at that point. 23 arrests have been made, with 3 suspected killed and several others having warrant out for their arrest. I read the New York Times headlines on the doctor and everything like that, and I've read some of the stuff coming out of Colombia. I don't know what your take is on that, Carlos. I personally don't want to say anything further until I know more about what happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's a complicated situation where it's still not clear what really went down. The Colombians are saying that they weren't there to kill the president, but they were hired to supposedly arrest him, and that when they got there, he was already dead. Or it's a whole load of chisme at the moment. So yeah, I think we need to wait and see what the actual details, the factual details are.
Absolutely. In Puerto Rico, excuse me, I ran across 2 headlines stating pretty much the same thing. One from Bloomberg, one from Reuters, and it's that Puerto Rico wins bankruptcy deal ahead of pension cut fight. I'll read the first 2 paragraphs from Bloomberg News. Puerto Rico's Financial Oversight Board struck a deal with the main group of the island's unsecured creditors, a breakthrough in the government's bankruptcy that removes one roadblock to the current plan for slashing $35 billion of its remaining debt. I believe the debt in total was $170 billion. The deal struck on the eve of a court hearing Tuesday may also put pressure on the remaining bond insurers that are among the biggest creditors still fighting the proposed debt restructuring plan. Admittedly, I'm not very good when it comes to economics. And so I read both that piece and I read the Reuters piece. It seems like a lot of high level stuff. And I just went back to where is the Puerto Rican the Puerto Rican people on all this, because this is high level stuff happening where the Puerto Rican people essentially have no say. And this is happening to an island, which as an idea, nationhood or this idea of a Puerto Rican nation is an idea, but it's not a reality. They're a colonized people. So all this stuff is happening at a very high level, and you're hearing a lot of the political actors involved and negotiations and cutting this deal and cutting that deal. I read both pieces and I just kept thinking, where are the Puerto Rican people on this?
Right.
But I'll wait for your response before we go to the next slide.
Do we have like well, of course we have. We need to look into like analysis from Puerto Ricans themselves and in terms of this particular deal and how they think is going to affect them. Of course, we already know that it's going to be negative impact for Puerto Ricans, and so yeah, let's keep an eye on that.
Absolutely. In Venezuela, excuse me, two things this week. Essentially is the biggest headlines. Of course, there's always stuff happening everywhere, but there are a lot of clashes between state security forces and the gangs, and some are describing it, excuse me, as a situation that's getting a little out of control, while the Venezuelan government is saying that they do have things under control, and in fact, so here's a second headline. Excuse me. Opposition leader Emilio Graterón, a former mayor seeking refuge in Chile, claiming he fears being arrested by the Maduro government. The Popular Will Party, an opposition party, saw a few members of its members be arrested by state security forces, accusing them of being behind the recent surge in gang violence, mostly concentrated in Caracas. Juan Guaidó personally reached out to the government of Chile, which has promised Graterón protection. So you have the Venezuelan government accusing some of these opposition leaders of being behind this recent surge in gang violence, and there's a crackdown by the government on both the actual gangs that are trying to control certain regions, and at the same time, coupled with this, according to what the Venezuelan government says, is this orchestrated thing happening between these opposition leaders and the gangs.
I would say that again, like again, I don't want to take a simplistic take and gangs and violence in Venezuela has been a historical thing from before the revolution, before the Bolivarian Revolution. It's existed. There continues to be poverty. There continues to be social strife and conflict, and just as in Cuba. And it's not to say that the government, of course, has been trying to better the conditions of working class people in Venezuela, but we have to be real and recognize that these things exist. Gangs exist, violence exists in working class neighborhoods in Caracas, particularly, and of course, that. I'm not too familiar with the topic. I imagine that there is they do have links. They have confirmed links between the opposition and these gangs, and I'm sure the opposition are going to use all in their capacity to destabilize the country further. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if that was true. But yeah, again, like we do have to take a more nuanced position and say, I don't think we could just say pin gang violence to just the opposition. But yeah,
I was in the Dominican Republic, and I believe it was 2013, and I ended up interviewing the Venezuelan ambassador to the Dominican Republic. His name escapes me right now at the moment, but I don't know if you folks remember back then. You had these middle class so-called radicals barricading themselves. It was these people in BMWs and Mercedes-Benz and calling themselves revolutionaries and barricading their own communities. And then later on, we found out, that the U.S. government was they had a change. U.S. empire had a change in tactics where they were basically. They were funding many youth leaders and youth student leaders, and so look, I'm not saying the United States is behind the recent gang surge, but the opposition has taken advantage of certain things, certain phenomena, in order to try to destabilize the country.
And also just think how easy it would be for the opposition. These are wealthy. Super wealthy politicians, families who can, of course, offer next to nothing to these gang members in Caracas to do whatever they want them to do. So yeah, that wouldn't be surprising at all.
Yeah. Moving on, excuse me, to Brazil. President Jair Bolsonaro was in the hospital recently. Then released after receiving treatment to an obstructed intestine following a 2018 stabbing. The initial thought was that he was going to require surgery, but he did not require surgery. And of course, he's being, right now, Brazil is in a state of, somewhat a very chaotic situation where, we've covered this over the last couple of weeks, where government officials are being accused of taking bribes or for in exchange for COVID-19 vaccines, so on and so forth. And then there are calls for Jair Bolsonaro to step down and resign. And excuse me, there has been another impeachment call, and there's more pressure mounting on Jair Bolsonaro.
Yeah, and I was saying in terms of his him being in the hospital, I can't help but think that, you know, I was quite hopeful that he'd be gone, but you know, I've been reading that it looks like what he was trying to do is get some sympathy. You know, his ratings are like super low. All the corruption scandal that even his own people are turning against him, his own supporters and voters and stuff. So you know, it's a bit of a stunt show to try and, you know, get those ratings back up. It is what it seems like.
He's a wild dude. You know, I've been following him since he first got into. He's just at, you know, and I'm putting it mildly. I'm being very polite right now. I mean, the guys has said some just off the wall crazy shit. But anyways, moving on to Argentina, Presidente Alberto Fernandez says talks with the IMF or the International Monetary Fund are advancing in hopes of restructuring its $45 million debt to the fund, calling recent meetings as quote unquote very productive. And this has always been a constant thing between, you know, our countries in Latin America and the World Bank and the IMF constantly being in debt. But I'll wait for your response on this one before we want to move on to the next topic.
I'm not too familiar with the case, and, you know, what I do hope is that, you know, this restructuring means less pressure on social services, public services, which is what tends to happen in these deals. Like the public, the working class are the ones that bear the brunt of these debts. You know, taking cuts in public spending. So you know, I do hope that the progressive government of Argentina are, you know, doing what they can for their people. Absolutely.
In Colombia, and I'll wait to hear. I know you're always in tune with what's happening there, if you have anything else, but the big headline I saw this week was $185 million worth of cocaine was seized by the Colombian and U.S. authorities off the Colombian coast, and they accused this criminal gang Clan de Golfo of being the owners of the drugs. I didn't want to get into too much further deeper into the topic, but I didn't really see any big headlines coming out of Colombia. Anything happening on your end with your people, Carlos?
The major thing is that we are about to celebrate independence on the 20th. The protesters, you know, the protests have died down somewhat, and there's a hope that Independence Day has always been an important date, especially for a progressive community in Colombia. And so it seems that the protesters, revolutionaries, and progressives are going to use the 20th of July to really keep pushing back against the government. And so, yeah, you know, we'll be seeing shortly in the media how this unfolds in Colombia, the protests and the marches that will be happening on the 20th and the following days.
Have we done a program on what's happened with the former members of the FARC? Like, where are they now? What's happening? You know, how we should do something like that. You know,
we should.
Have they been reintroduced back into society? What are they doing? What are the, you know, I'd be curious to see a whole, you know, hear a program on that. Just some.
Yeah, we should definitely do it. But, you know, just to quickly to say that there different things are happening. You know, some of them have gone back. I'd say like a very small minority, maybe hundreds, a few hundred have gone back to
fighting.
And then you have factions. There's the legal party, which were originally called FARC, but changed the meaning to Fuerzas Alternativas. What was it? Fuerzas Alternativas Revolucionarias de Colombia. So like using the same acronym, but changing. It wasn't about armed revolutionary struggle anymore. And they've now changed it to Comunes. So now their party is called Comunes, It's sad to say, but it does seem like Comunes is really not great politically. It seems like the political leaders of the party are kind of enjoying their positions of power and mellowing down a little bit, seeming a little bit less revolutionary, more reformist, getting used to the congressional lifestyle, and politically and ideologically, it does seem that they're changing directions, but there are of course factions, revolutionary factions that still exist, who are kind of arguing with them, fighting back a little bit. So yeah, not everybody in the party in Comunes is leading that way. I'd say the top leaders are, but some of the lower ranking leaders are still pretty much Marxist, Leninist, and revolutionary. And then of course you've got the regular soldiers who are living in these zones and these camps that are the demobilized camps in the countryside, and they're bearing the brunt of this whole situation, being killed left, right, and center by paramilitary forces. So yeah, it's generally not great. The peace deal was not, it was never going to be successful because the terms that were agreed were very minimal and weren't about systematic change or system change or economic change, really. That wasn't up for discussion, actually, the economic change. So yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, but Colombian people are revolutionary. As long as the conditions of poverty, inequality, violence continues, there's always going to be revolutionaries, including some in the new Communist Party.
ELN never put their guns down, right? There's still
negotiations, but those aren't going great either. The leadership
are they happening still in Cuba?
Yeah. So they have a delegation of ELN leaders in Cuba, but and negotiating with this current government is it's a nightmare for them because they're not really interested,
right,
in negotiating. They're just there for for appearances sake. And what they do is they might be doing the talking, they might be negotiating in Cuba, and at the same time that they're negotiating, they're also performing military operations against their combatants in the countryside. So
yeah, and then just I know folks have heard us say this before, and you should know this. The U.S. government has used, the previous administration used those negotiation talks as a pretext to put Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. And so Pompeo, this is from Pompeo and Bush, and Biden has said that he's not going to not only remove the 243 new sanctions that were introduced under the Trump administration, but he's not going to remove them off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. All right, so we're almost closing this up here. Just a couple other headline pieces here. In Bolivia, as we mentioned before, Evo Morales had publicly accused the CIA of contracting Argentine intelligence agents, in the 2019 coup against his presidency. I'm not sure if it was an interview or just I believe it was an interview. He also said the government of Ecuador and Brazil at the time were also involved as well. And he gave he contextualized the moment and this moment in history, saying basically that you have governments that are there as lackeys of the imperialists, and then there's revolutionary forces, progressive forces in Latin America who are trying to become independent and trying to integrate with the rest of the Latin American world. And you have popular resistance movements everywhere that are moving in one direction, while the United States empire is trying to continue to control the region using these puppet governments. Carlos, I don't know if you had any response to that before we move on to the final piece here in Peru.
Now, just to say, you know, this is something that we need to pay attention to, like how the USA, the empire, is really changing up their tactics a little bit. They know that direct military intervention doesn't go down well anymore. The majority of people won't have it. The majority of countries won't have it in Latin America, and so they have to do things like this. You know, these hiring mercenaries. What we're seeing in Haiti as well, where supposedly they're not involved, but we know that they're involved somehow. And we know that the Colombians who took part in that operation were most definitely trained by the US. So yeah, that's kind of like their tactics nowadays. And what we're seeing in Cuba as well, because it doesn't have to always be military either. We're talking about soft coups in terms of trying to convince a population to overthrow their own government through social media, which is what they're doing in Cuba, and convince diaspora communities, convince entire populations in the West to believe that this is true, that the people in Cuba really do want to overthrow their government. So yeah, we need to kind of I guess always try and keep up and analyze these innovations, the new things that the US empire is doing to destabilize our region.
Something I said to the compañeros privately over at ANTICONQUISTA, I was thinking about this. I said, I posed the question, is there a NATO of the South, right? Of the global South in Latin America? We know we have ALBA and CELAC and UNRST, which are basically political organizations, but there's not and it's tricky, right? Because we still have liberal democracies in Latin America. We don't have a Cuba everywhere in Latin America, so it could be tricky. But I think at some point that discussion should be had where it's just simple. It's just, we're not going to allow, specifically the West to militarily intervene and attack a sovereign nation in the region. And so, that's just, that was just something that I thought of just, considering everything that's happening with Cuba right now. But yeah, so moving on to our last and final piece here. In Peru, new leftist president Pedro Castillo is asking China for help in rolling out vaccines against COVID-19. And that made headlines, of course. He's an interesting figure. For maybe some of us, he's not, hardcore enough, revolutionary enough. But again, we'll take that progressive move of the needle, if you will, in Peru, certainly, and we hope that he can help integrate Peru into this new, again, progressive left that we have here in Latin America. So, and the fact that he's cozying up to the Chinese, I think that's good news.
Yeah, definitely good news for Peru. Good news for the region. As you say, hopefully there's some. I know during the campaign he had to kind of distance himself a little bit from Venezuela and stuff, and it's understandable because unfortunately because of the corporate right wing and imperialist propaganda, a lot of our people see Venezuela and Cuba and so on as this kind of hellish countries. So yeah, hopefully now that he's in power, he will form closer ties with him.
Absolutely. So, folks, that's excuse me. That's all we have for this program. Please continue to support the work that we do. I'm going to say something. I saw somebody post on Facebook. Someone who's considers part of the left. Mentioned saying, "Hey, Jimmy Dore had this individual on their program." Jimmy Dore has over 750,000 followers now, and every time he puts out a video, he gets tens of thousands of views. Here we are, this little organization of Latinos targeting the Latino diaspora. And in the United States, we have about 60 million Latinos. How many Latinos in the UK? Do you know, Carlos, roughly?
It's a bit complicated. I always say like the last census, it was 200,000 Latinos.
Okay.
Without counting those who are here with Spanish passports and without counting undocumented Latinos. Right. Realistically, it's more like 500, 600,000 Latinos.
Okay. So, you know, we're targeting our people, and there's a specific intent for that, right? And we hope that we continue to get support from all, you know, primarily our main target is Latinos. But, you know, that mentioning Jimmy Dore, you know, I responded with, you know, it would be nice to see a guy with that platform, right? A white guy, let's be clear, a white guy of the quote unquote whatever left, you know, to put more Latino voices, you know, especially when we're talking about issues that impact our Latino diaspora, and issues that affect our mother countries. Now, I don't watch every Jimmy Dore program. I just haven't seen or heard too many Latino voices on his platform. And he often gets, look, and no disrespect to, you know, people like Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal who put out good work, you know, but it would be nice every once in a while for him to have Latino voices speaking about issues that impact the, you know, our people directly, you know, and he often will have, you know, certain issues that come up. The Cuba issue came up, you know, this week, you know, and he's got, you know, again, no disrespect to those folks, but he's got those folks on there. So, you know, look, we're trying to, and Carlos, you've spoken to this before, you know, the work that we do is not only is a labor of love, but I believe you said, correct me if I'm wrong, you said we've sent over $100,000 to Latin America, which is nothing to, you know, look, we're proud of that, right? Like, so, you know, we're doing this. This is a labor of love. This is where we're trying
and
to.
It's important to say, you know, we're a small organization. We've sent all that money back home. None of the money that we get from Patreon or however else through the merch shop or whatever goes to our pockets, our individual pockets. Some of these characters on the left, as you say, Victor, some of them do good work. But unfortunately, there's careers being made out of this. More, I would say, probably a good fair amount more than our 100,000 that we've sent back home has been made by some of these people, and it's unfortunate because, you know, they're making careers out of our people's struggle, oftentimes not really focusing on the revolutionary shit that we should be talking about, and so I think, you know, we do need support, subscriptions and Patreons, and you know, sharing this video and stuff would really help us out.
Absolutely. I do want to respond to Adrian Castro. You said, and so Adrian, respectfully, don't like the term Latino. If you are on pro-justice, that's all. I'm not sure what exact term you're proposing that I use. If you want me to use the term Latinx, I personally don't use the term Latinx. And I'm gonna tell you why. And I think Carlos, I believe you use the term, which is fine. I don't, you know, carry the way. Pero yo no vengo de ese mundo, the world of academia, me personally, right? I don't. And mi mamá, que no habla inglés, all right? Mi mamá que no usa ese término de Latinx. When my mother starts using the term Latinx, que my mother is not, ella no es política, no es comunista, no es revolucionaria. My mother's just living in Perth Amboy, chilling in her house, eating plátanos every day, cooking rice and beans and making it. Cuando mami usa ese término, después yo lo puedo adoptar. Si no, I'm not going to use it. So with all due respect to everybody out there, you know, I don't mean to, you know, but the world of academia sometimes does drive me a little crazy because, and I'm not saying people like you, Carlos. I'm talking about, you know who I'm talking about. People.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree with you.
Our people, and we're fucking lab rats. And then,
and I agree with you. Like you say, Latinx or Latinx to an ordinary working class Latin American, and they're gonna be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
They don't know what it means. They don't know. They've never heard the term.
I think there is a space for it because, as progressives, we do need to see that you know, the words that we use are very gendered, and we want to be conscious of that. And that's why I try and use it. I don't always use it, but I recognize that aspect of it, and that's why I'm not too bothered about it. But I do recognize that as alienating because you know, certain academic progressive circles are the ones who use it, and working class Latinos don't have probably never and will never hear the term really. So
Right.
especially Spanish speaking working class Latino, so or Latin Americans or Latinx, whatever.
Yeah, but I didn't mean to go off topic there. But I just did want to respond. I say that, by the way, Adrian, I know you're still thinking. I say that respectfully, like the way you said that respectfully to me. I say that respectfully to you. But back to the original point of why we're doing this every single week. Great show. Yes, we need a Latin American treaty organization, folks. I'm going to keep saying we're in a 500+ year fucking war against these people. These people are not our friends. They're our enemies. There are class enemies. There are all sorts of our enemies. I am a brown nationalist. I am a now third worldist, and so we have to push back against this fucking bullshit. We have to defend Cuba. We have to defend the revolutionary and progressive forces in Latin America. And it's not going to be pretty, and it's not perfect, and we got to be critical and self-critical. And none of this shit's gonna, to think that somehow, again, no one's saying that Cuba is this paradise. No one is saying that. What we're saying is that there's two different trajectories, right? There's the trajectory of slavery, white supremacy, settler colonialism morphed into capitalism and imperialism, and then there's this progressive trajectory of nationalism, people's liberation struggles for sovereignty and self-determination and self-governance, then leading into socialism and hopefully one day communism, right? So we have to be on that side. We have to be very clear. We have to be on that side, and we need to fight back against all the propaganda, against all the fucking lies, against this new third way bullshit, nuanced bullshit that people want to push out there. That we're for against lifting the blockade, but we're against the Cuban Revolution. Get the fuck out of here with that. That's not a very cogent and clear analysis of the situation. You can't have it both ways. So we appreciate the audience supporting us. We appreciate your support. We can't do this without your support. And we want to, eventually we need to infiltrate the high schools and the colleges, wherever Latinos are at. We need to infiltrate these spaces because our people are going to go one of two ways. They're going to go one of two ways. And just like Carlos, you mentioned that lady who before the intellectual scholar who may or may not be conscious of knowing what she's doing when she's puts this type of work out. Our people could go one of two ways, and it's important that we get them over here on this side. Lo tenemos que jalar and be like, yo, let me show you this revolutionary socialist shit that we're talking about, and get them on this side. Carlos, anything else?
No, that's it, bro. Thank you.
Right.
I also wanted to say, I was thinking, like, you keep coming on these shows with your cough, and I think it's and I think it shows your determination. Your determination to wanted to be on here, helping our people be informed about the situation back home. So I appreciate you.
I've been suffering from upper respiratory. Yo le digo a mami, yo te echo la culpa a ti, porque every time since I was a little kid, my mother used to smoke in the 80s and 90s around me all the time, cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. Y yo siempre ando enfermo. And it's like they always ask me, hey, do you smoke? I've never left, I used to smoke weed back in the day a long time ago, but I never put a cigarette I put one cigarette in my mouth in 1992, 12 years old, and I thought I was going to die. I took my father's cigarette, put it in my mouth. I said, oh my God, I can never do this again in my life. But mami siempre fumaba, and I've been suffering from bronchitis and upper respiratory, all types of shit all the time. So,
no bronchitis is going to get in the way of informing our people.
Absolutely right on. Well, listen, that we're at the 1 hour 30 mark. It was a great program. Compañero Carlos, thank you. Audience, we thank you. Peace, and everybody have a great night.
Take care.